Got some interesting news today. Got some stuff here to go over before we get into the House of Commons proceedings and then obviously question period. A little podcast here known as Village Media has been doing some interviews with Trudeau, and I just find it more and more interesting that Trudeau has this overwhelming confidence. He's incredibly confident that the next election is going to be in his favor. I don't know where this confidence is coming from, but it continues to be put into the light here. So let's take a look.
Because politics is so much about feeling. And I remember when you were first elected, there was that feeling around the hockey rinks where I went that most people were going to vote Justin Trudeau's government. It's a different sense now. At the hockey rink and around the community, you hear people saying, Poilievre's going to get my vote.
Were they saying that? They weren't necessarily saying they were voting for me 6 months before the election, though. Mm-hmm. Like through the first half of the 2015 election, and I always worry about going too much. Oh well, 2015 we did it.
Yes.
But through the entire first half of the 2015 election, we were way behind in the polls. So there wasn't anything automatic or inevitable or even felt on the ground until the last few weeks of the campaign. So Canadians tend to make up their minds later. Right now, absolutely. There's a huge level of frustration that is, a lot of it's pointed at me. A lot of it is directed at me through very clever use of social media and attack ads that we haven't yet responded to. But to prejudge the outcome of an election already is something that I don't think people would be too wise in doing.
It's a fair point.
Well, I would also like to point out that you've had your run here. You've done your thing, Justin, for almost a decade, and a lot of people are fed up with it. And it is showing that people are fed up with it across the board. No matter what issue people want to debate or talk about, it always comes back and the finger always gets pointed back directly at your government, because everything that has happened to this point, everything that has led up to this point is pretty much your fault. There's no other way around it. And I find it funny that he still has this confidence. He still has this idea that no matter what's going to happen, he still has a chance here. And yeah, I'm sure there's going to be people that want to vote for him still. I don't know why, but there will be that group of people, most likely in the liberal college campuses and university campuses and the big cities like Toronto.
Minister, there's no question that there are some people who just quite simply aren't in your corner and want to see some change. And that's fair, right? That's democracy. That's their right. But what I think is different here is there seems to be a segment of people who have taken it to a whole new level. It's now pretty common that we see bumper stickers and flags that say F Trudeau. I don't ever remember seeing an F Harper flag or an F Chrétien flag. This to me isn't politics. This is personal. You must have seen them. It has to bother you.
My first thought, and you pointed out well, what has happened over the past years that has brought people to that place of that much anger? Canadian politics and Canadians in general used to be a little more civil around disagreements like that. One of the things we've seen with the phenomenon of amplification of extremist right-wing voices,
extremist right-wing voices. Okay, hold on. So the apathy towards you, Justin, has gotten to this level simply due to the policies you've put into place, simply because the way you have treated individuals, whether it is from the Freedom Convoy, people in your own caucus, your own government, people across the government side, whether it's Conservative, NDP, Bloc, whatever. All over Canada, even internationally, people look at you as a weak joke of a man, a weak leader, somebody who is no longer fit and realistically was never fit to be the leader. You want to go back to 2015, whenever that election happened, a lot of people were voting Trudeau in simply based off of his looks. He was a younger guy. He was handsome. He had a nice haircut. These were ads that they ran back in the day to try and demonize him and try to say to people, well, simply don't vote for him based off of his looks. But here we are 10 years later. Here's another thing going on. All of the foreign interference going on in our country right now, India being a massive part of it, Trudeau allowing pretty much whoever into the country as they please right now. Well, not right now, but a couple days ago, yesterday, and the day before, there is more or less, and I hate using this word because I'm not Tim Pool, but there is more or less a Indian civil war happening within Canada. Now, I know that sounds ridiculous right now, but you had Hindus fighting Khalistanis, and you also have the Sikh group. All of these different Indian religious groups going after each other within Canada. Stuff that would be happening over in India. Civil war type stuff there has now leaked over. I'm not going to play this entire video. Just going to run through it here, but the police are involved. Look at all the people here. It has leaked over into our country into ways that you really think stuff like this shouldn't be happening. Now, obviously, people have the freedom to protest. They have the right to freedom of speech. But when it comes to stuff like this, man, it has clearly gotten way out of hand. You have people from multiple different sides that would be fighting over in India are now here in Canada doing the exact same thing. They are attacking temple goers. They are harassing individuals. This kind of insanity has gotten way out of hand. And this is simply due to the amount of people we're bringing in unchecked. We have people from all of these different activist organizations from India that are now attacking one another within our streets. Fucking crazy. Absolute insanity. Another thing I'd like to get into before we get into House of Commons here. I'm not going to play this video. This is a very big story going around right now. This might actually cause an uprising in the US. These two people here had a pet raccoon and a pet squirrel. New York officials raided their house, took them, and euthanized the squirrel and the raccoon. Now, the story behind it is the raccoon and the squirrel, I think, either were hit by cars or they were suffering or something like that, so they brought them in to nurture them, and they kept them as pets kind of thing. The whole point I'm going to make here, you have the government raiding these people's houses to kill their pets, but the government does absolutely nothing in New York to stop the rampant crime, the amount of illegal migrants running around through New York City causing all sorts of havoc. You have laws that are passed in some of these states where you could steal nearly $1,000 worth of stuff and not get arrested. But the government is going out of their way to euthanize a raccoon and a squirrel based on one single phone call that was made. One complaint was filed. And I don't know, I just find it interesting. The government goes out of their way to respond to this instantly. But with everything else going on in the United States, especially in New York, they turn a blind eye to it. And one more thing, this is a lovely thing to kind of end on a somewhat high note here before we head in. A fuck Trudeau chant broke out at UFC Edmonton in Rogers Place. Let's take a listen. You love to hear it. You love to hear it.
Oral questions. Questions orales. The honourable member from Regina.
Question period!
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal Prime Minister's economic vandalism, over 2 million Canadians are visiting a food bank in a single month. Housing costs have doubled, and inflation continues to eat away at Canadians' paychecks. His massive deficits and tax hikes are causing extreme damage to the Canadian economy. For 8 out of the last 9 quarters, Canadian per-person GDP is down. This is a made-in-Canada, per-person GDP recession. That means Canadian workers work harder, but bring home less. So will the Prime Minister stop his economic vandalism and cancel his job-killing, paycheck-shrinking tax hikes?
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning we heard the sad news of the passing of the Honourable Murray Sinclair. Let me take a moment before we begin today to say a few words about him. As a former judge, senator, and chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Murray was determined to help Canada reckon with its colonial realities and bring healing to this country. He was a visionary and a leader, and his kind and fierce commitment to truth has pushed Canada forward in profound and lasting ways. Our hearts and minds are with his family, and Canada is a much better place for his service.
The Honourable Member from Regina Capel.
join in my honourable colleagues' sending of condolences, but we are witnessing economic vandalism in real time. Last Thursday, this government was briefed that the only sector of the Canadian economy actually producing any growth was the energy sector. And what did they do today? They slapped a punishing cap on Canadian production.
Exactly.
All this will do is chase investments and jobs to other countries. But that's something this Prime Minister is good at. He's increased Canadian investment into the US by $63 billion last year alone. So will the Prime Minister stop fueling the US economy, cancel his tax hikes, and cancel the production cap to bring those investment dollars back home?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, we were very pleased to announce an emissions cap with respect to the oil and gas sector in this country. Given that oil and gas constitutes 31% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions, it is important that we work with the sector to reduce emissions, just as we do with every sector. It is also true that as we move towards a lower carbon economy across the world, oil and gas produced with the lowest emissions is actually going to have value around the world. We are moving forward with a plan to address climate change and build a strong economy going forward. They are stuck in the past and ignoring the science of climate.
Before I get to the honourable member, I'm just going to ask the honourable member from Calgary Centre, please, to hold on until this question is turned to ask.
Starting off early, Greg, aren't we?
Member from Regina Capel.
All this production cap will do is make other countries richer while making Canadians poorer. But that's something this Prime Minister is so good at. Consider this, GDP per capita in Canada, down. In the US, it's up. 9 years ago, average wages in the US and Canada were almost identical. Now, an American worker brings home $22,000 more than their Canadian counterpart. And $500 billion in investments has fled Canada to the United States, creating bigger paychecks for American workers, all because of this Prime Minister's high taxes and massive deficits. The Prime Minister is the #1 job creator in the United States. So instead of helping the Canadian economy, why not fight for Canada for once?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, maybe the member opposite should take the time to actually read the information about the pollution cap. Production is forecast to increase 16% by 2030, Mr. Speaker. So this idea that we're somehow cutting production is simply not true.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. After 9 years of this Prime Minister, supported by the Bloc, $500 million has left Canada for the U.S. The Conservatives will bring investment and jobs back to Canada. This Prime Minister's high taxes and deficits have helped the U.S. prosper while Canadians are desperately trying to house and feed themselves. A U.S. worker now earns $22,000 more than his Canadian counterpart. Will the Prime Minister keep abdicating his responsibilities? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker.
Oh, thank God it's not a real voice.
A patriotic Canadian woman, and I believe that we live in a wonderful country. I wouldn't want to be American. But if the Conservatives want to compare, well, this is what should be compared. Inflation is lower in Canada. The prime lending rate is lower in Canada. The average Canadian's lifespan is 4 years longer. So the Conservatives keep thinking the U.S. is better than Canada. The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. What's worse is after 9 years of this Prime Minister, three different U.S. presidents, this government has been incapable of producing wealth in Canada. The gap between wealth is growing, whether it's the softwood lumber or the Buy American Act. This Prime Minister has failed miserably to protect Canadian workers. He's creating more jobs. He's the #1 job creator in the U.S. When will the Prime Minister stand up for Canada, cut taxes, and bring our money and our jobs and our investments back to Canada? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, once again, here's what we do better in Canada. Inflation is lower. The prime lending rate is lower. The average lifespan is longer. I will quote from David Rosenberg, a well-known economist. He said that last week, investors based in the U.S. should contemplate leaving New York for Toronto. And that's because he knows that Canadian companies are doing better. Who better to quote, Mr. Speaker?
Député de la Prairie.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. On the eve of the U.S. elections, Peter Harder and other senators must not be blocking our bill to protect supply management in free trade deals, because we know that the U.S. wants to reopen the trade deal. This is not just harmful, it's dangerous because it will cause hundreds of thousands of job losses in Quebec. Will the Prime Minister stop threatening Quebec's farmers? The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, being a farmer all my life and then being involved in the supply management system for all my agricultural career, I am fully aware of how valuable the supply management system is to this country. And I belong to a government and a party that has initiated supply management and continue to support supply management. And I can tell my honourable colleague in this country that this government will continue to support the supply management program.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. The next U.S. president could open up NAFTA or the free trade deal in 2026. And depending who wins, it could be our supply management system that pays the price. So our farmers would like to hear their will respected. They don't want two unelected senators to hold up a bill to protect supply management. Will the Prime Minister stop those two senators from preventing C-282 from passing? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've already explained to our Bloc friends that senators are independent. And the other thing is that the Bloc admits that they can't protect supply management. The only people who can, because we truly want to and we're committed to doing so, is us. Whatever happens on the other side of the U.S. border, only a Liberal government will protect supply management here.
The Honourable Member from Burnaby South.
Uh-oh.
In Canada, we believe healthcare should be there when you need it and it should be free. Today, Collège des médecins du Québec président was quoted saying that patients are typically told, I can do your surgery in 14 months. If you come to my private clinic, I can get it done in 1 month. It'll cost you $25,000. Dr. Trudeau says that's questionable, if not illegal. I think it's pretty clearly illegal. Does the Prime Minister agree?
Hear, hear. Hear. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Public, universal, available for all, and most of all, making sure that the patient doesn't pay. That we ensure in our country that when people come in for care, that they're taken care of on the basis of their need, not the size of their bank account. That's what distinguishes us from so many countries in the world. That is a principle that we stand up proudly for. I would suggest to the Leader of the NDP, we've worked well together on things from pharmacare to dental care. There are many different challenges the provinces are presenting to health care right now, and certainly this party opposite, the Conservatives that would seek to ravage our health care system. Let's work together to make sure we protect it.
L'honorable député de Burnaby Sud.
The Liberals are letting people get charged to get to the front of the line. That should be illegal.
In Quebec, the private sector is taking up more and more of a role in healthcare. The Quebec College of Physicians and Surgeons is calling for this trend to be dealt with as quickly as possible. People who seek profit are causing longer delay times for healthcare. Why is the Prime Minister allowing U.S.-style companies to take advantage of Canadians suffering?
The Bloc was going to call a vote of non-confidence in Trudeau, but that came and went within seconds.
Absolutely clear is that it's our government's priority to ensure that our healthcare system is universal and entirely public and available to all Canadians. We've made a lot of headway with dental care and pharmacare, but I think there's a lot of work that can still be done, that should still be done. But on the other side, the Conservative Party wants to cut. They want to make huge cuts to funding for healthcare, and that's totally unacceptable, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Dufferin-Caledon.
After 9 years of these NDP Liberals, almost 50% of young Canadians believe they will never own a home. This Liberal housing accelerator is an absolute joke. Common sense Conservatives have a plan. They're going to axe the GST on new home builds. On an $800,000 house, this will save $40,000. Wow. And the Conservative leader has now written to the premiers of every province asking them to match this tax cut. When will these NDP Liberals finally get it through their heads? They're funding bureaucracies, axe the tax on new builds so young people can buy a house.
The Bloc were waiting for the Liberals to hand over some sort of documents or sign some sort of legislation in, and I'm assuming the Liberals probably did it.
Speaker, has he consulted with his caucus? A dozen, probably more, Conservative members have advocated specifically for that program. They went behind the back of the Leader of the Opposition because they wanted to advocate for their constituents to see more homes built. By calling for the end of the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is how they would pay for this new bold idea, so-called, they would end support to communities for homelessness. They would end support for more building for middle-class Canadians. Mr. Speaker, it's an unacceptable, untenable position.
Well said. The honourable member from Dufferin-Caledon.
Oh man, here's what Liberal housing advisor Mike P. Moffat said about the Liberal housing accelerator. Can anyone in the federal government tell me why Toronto deserves $471 million in housing accelerator funds to massively hike development taxes? And housing starts in Toronto are down 20%. Even Liberal advisors know the housing accelerator's a joke. Will these NDP Liberals finally realize they're funding bureaucracies, tripling development charges, and not getting any houses built for young Canadians? Yeah.